My name is Debbie Kudelis. I'm the Manager of Regulatory Support and Compliance for Radiology. Today I will be talking to you about investigational new drugs. This will be part 2 from Sally Schwartz, who presented part 1 of the IND process for submitting applications to the FDA. The IND application consists of a cover letter, your authorization for direct contact, your Form FDA 1571, which is considered a cover sheet, your table of contents, your introductory statement and general investigational plan, and your investigator's brochure. An IB is not required for an exploratory IND. However, an investigator's brochure, if a drug is supplied for a multi-center trial to each investigator, then you will need to present a investigator's brochure. A study protocol is required for each study that is planned with the initial IND application. The investigator data and the facilities data and the IRB data is also required. You may submit this in a narrative form or in a Form FDA 1572, which is much simpler if you just do the form. Section 7 is the chemistry, manufacturing, and control data, which you heard much about from Sally Schwartz. The pharmacology and toxicology data, the previous human experience, if there is any, usually with an exploratory IND, which is first in man application, there is no previous human experience. Section 10 is additional information. This is where you would cover a radioactive drug. This is for sufficient data from animal or human studies to allow for a reasonable calculation of radiation absorbed dose to the whole body and critical organs upon administration to human subjects. An exploratory IND, which is a phase 0, phase 1 radioactive drug, must include sufficient data for radiation dosimetry calculations. Section 11 is any other relevant information that may be required by the FDA. And then Section 12 is your clinical trials certification of compliance. Section 13 is appendices. This is where you will want to submit your cross-reference letter of authorization if you reference another IND. Another one is your Form 1572 and your CV for your investigators, your animal organ dosimetry report, and your human dosimetry report. The human dosimetry report is your radiation exposure that is calculated from animal data that is extrapolated into humans. This is tabulated dosimetry tables. Next is your informed consent forms. Each study that is planned that you submit into the application, you will have a consent for each one. And then your IRB approvals. If you do not have your IRB approval at that time, you will submit it later on. Next is the case report forms, also referred to as your data collection forms, and that is included for each study that is planned. The toxicity report that is referred from the pharmacology and toxicology data section. And then last but not least is your Form FDA 3674, that's your certification of compliance for clinicaltrials.gov. Next topic that I would like to talk about is the IND clinical protocol. And again, I just want to emphasize, for each planned study, you need to submit a protocol. A clinical protocol consists of the objectives and purpose of the study, the sponsor investigator qualifications you just want to mention or refer to your Form 1572, your patient selection criteria, which is your inclusion-exclusion criteria, the number of healthy volunteers and patients with the disease that you plan to study, your design description of the study, the method for determining the dose to be used that you will be administering to the subjects, the planned maximum dosage that you will administer, and the duration of the individual patient exposure to the radioactive drug, meaning how many times the subjects will be administered the radioactive drug. Observations and measurements to fulfill the objectives of the study, and then your safety assessments, meaning your clinical procedures, such as your physical exams, pre and post injections, your laboratory tests, pre and post injections, such as your blood draws, your CBC, your urinalysis, or other measures to monitor the effects of the drug in human subjects and to minimize risk. With the protocol, you need to submit an informed consent form. What I would like to say about the consent is there are new rules with the 2018 Common Rule. With the new rule, you have new general requirements regarding how consent information is presented. They've added one basic element regarding private identifiable information or identifiable biospecimens. There are 3 new additional elements, and there's a new section in the elements of broad consent. I'm not going to get into these today because these just recently came out. When you are working in IRB for your new submission, they will go through this with you when you're developing your consent form. Your documents for the RDRC, IRB, and for the FDA are all prepared concurrently. Your first submission goes to RDRC. However, you will need your IRB and your IND draft submissions submitted with your RDRC submission. Your RDRC submission is due the first week of the month, first Tuesday. There is a full committee review with RDRC the last Thursday of the month. RDRC will do an initial first pass after you submit the first Tuesday of the month and give you feedback. They may ask for some revisions. The revisions usually will be part of the protocol and maybe in part of the consent form. At that point, after you've submitted your revisions, you will want to submit your IND. IRB will still be in draft mode. IRB will not schedule your full board committee until RDRC issues the RDRC approvable letter at the end of the month when they officially review your submission. And at that time, IRB will schedule you for a full board committee review. During that time, your IND should be submitted. Once it goes in, the FDA will log it into the central document room. They will issue a IND number and a letter of acknowledgement saying they have received your submission. And when you receive the letter of acknowledgement, you will submit this letter to the IRB. Your FDA submission for your initial IND always begins with serial number 0000, and then your next submission will be 0001. The FDA will respond to a new IND submission with a letter of acknowledgement. The project manager will issue this letter of acknowledgement by mail and may also send it by email to the sponsor investigator. The letter of acknowledgement will have a date of receipt of the IND and also include the IND number. The IND number you will want to include in your IRB submission. It will also include instructions and future communication for IND submissions. It will have the contact person, usually the project manager's contact information. It will also have future communication contact information as well. So after your letter of acknowledgement is issued, from the date of receipt of the IND, which is in your letter of acknowledgement, starts your 30-day clock, because there is a 30-day mandatory waiting period. So the FDA review team will evaluate the IND submission for any deficiencies. Just note that while your IND submission and RDRC submission, as well as your IRB, is being evaluated, you are not allowed to initiate your clinical study. All 3 of these regulatory committees need to review and approve, and you need to have your approval letters in hand before you're allowed to initiate your clinical trial. So your FDA review team is made up of a clinical reviewer, a chemistry reviewer, as well as the pharmacology toxicology reviewer and the project manager. The project manager is the person that you will be communicating with. That person will send you emails and hard copy email. There's usually addressed to the sponsor investigator, as well as the person on the authorization for direct contact. So after 30 days, the FDA needs to respond to you. Usually you will get an email when it will be labeled as an information request. An information request is just a broad general category. There are different kinds of information requests. It can be chemistry, it could be microbiology, it could be your toxicology, and within that email, they will have a list of questions. This will come with an expected due date. Invariably, it will be within 24 hours if it's a weekday, and if it's a Friday, it's going to be on Monday. And if Monday is a holiday, it will still be due on Monday. So once all information requests are completed and we've responded and the FDA is satisfied with all of our requests, then they will issue a may proceed letter. At that time, you need to submit that letter to IRB and RDRC. They will forward to you your official approval letters from the RDRC and IRB. Then you may begin your study. The last part of the presentation, I want to talk to you about IND maintenance. You've submitted your IND, you've gone through all of your information requests, and now you received your letter to start your clinical study. And you received RDRC and IRB approval. There are things that you need to report back to the FDA on the progress of your study and if you need to change your clinical protocol. For instance, amendments need to be reported to the FDA. For a new protocol, if an investigator wants to add a new protocol under your IND, you need to submit a new investigator amendment and a new protocol amendment. And you'll go through the same steps that we had just talked about. You need a new clinical protocol and informed consent, as well as the IRB approval, as well as the forms we had talked about, the 1571, 1572, and 3674. Next would be a change in the existing protocol that you have already submitted and that is already approved. So any significant changes. Another amendment is your information amendment. This is an amendment that is not covered under a protocol amendment, such as a chemistry amendment or any other technical kind of amendment. An annual report is your progress report. You want to submit to the FDA within 60 days of the anniversary date. This is the date that your IND went into effect. Safety reporting is different from your IRB reporting status. So your FDA has 7-day and 15-day reporting versus your IRB, which is 24-hour and 10-day reports. So you want to become familiar with those reporting requirements. And also the terminology is somewhat different than what we expect here at the IRB. Any submission after your initial submission to the FDA, your serial numbers go in sequential order. So the initial submission is 0000. Any submission after that is 0001, and so on. Every submission, you submit a cover letter and a Form 1571. Once you submit the new protocol, there is not a 30-day waiting period. You may begin your clinical study. However, if you want feedback from the FDA, you want a response, you need to include that in your cover letter. If you do not need a response from the FDA, then as long as you have, say, your FedEx tracking that they received, and you have your IRB and RDRC and any other regulatory committee approval, you may proceed with initiating your clinical study. Changes in protocol that are significant need to be reported to the FDA. So a significant change would be a change in the number of participants. Say you want to add a new arm, a new new disease patient population, or significantly increase the number of participants that you want to study. Change the age group or change the dose in the administration that you are giving the participants. That's a significant change. However, with the exploratory IND, the phase 0, phase 1, you have much more flexibility with that protocol, but you're still required to report to the FDA any significant changes. Thank you.